Hey, what's going on, champs? I'm Aaron Deliosa. Welcome to an Immigrant's Life podcast. My podcast about immigrants, immigration, and everything in between.
7th of December, and it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. You know what's next. Anyways, have you started your Christmas shopping yet? For our Jewish friends, I hope you guys had a good Hanukkah. As for the rest, I'm sorry if I didn't mention your celebration. Not that I don't want to, it's just I'm not educated in that topic yet. Here's a great idea. Why don't you educate me about your religion by sending me a message on Instagram or Facebook at An Immigrant's Life, or send me an email at animmigrantslife@yahoo.com. While I'm waiting for your messages, I'd love for you to listen to my podcast, An Immigrant's Life, which you can find on all podcast platforms and YouTube. I know you don't want to hear about my ramblings, so let's talk about this week's episode. I had a great talk with our guest this week about her art, the supernatural, about her being adopted, and all the traumas that came with it. Oh, by the way, their band Blue Ghost released a new song called When Autumn Fills My Lungs. It's a pretty good song, I like it, so I'm pretty sure you'll like it too. Having said all that, without further ado, let's get into the show. Isa, dalawa, tatlo. Today's guest is a cartoonist, a musician, and a poet. She's a Visayan vixen and the mystic of Malpitas. Everyone, please welcome Trinidad Escobar.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
Trinidad. How are you?
I am doing very well and I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Of course. This is fun. We get to know each other.
Of course, yeah. I love it. And cool people. Well, you're cool. I don't know about me.
You're very cool. I think podcasters are very cool.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, let's get to it. Let's talk about Trinidad's hero's journey. Where was she from? Her background, all this stuff.
Okay. I am from the Philippines. I was born in Bataan, but my family's originally from Northern Samar. And I was adopted by a Tagalog and Ilocano family that was living in America, in California, in 1986. And I was raised in California in the Bay Area. And I have always done some kind of art since I was little, like a lot of artists. Grew up wanting to be an artist and thinking that I had to do regular 9-to-5 work and then make art my hobby. Just kind of having that mentality my whole life. And then when I was in college, I was studying psychology and sociology because I wanted to work with young people in some capacity in terms of their behavior and the way that they think. I wanted to tap into some of that and realized I actually wanted to work with young people in the arts because the type of connection I was looking for in education and teaching was in self-exploration and a lot of reflection required or a lot of reflection and reflective work that I think a lot of young people don't have spaces to exercise, especially in school. Mm-hmm. So, especially at home. So, I switched my major and decided to start doing art, like poetry and writing, illustration on my own without, any professional training or like any structured training, but then pursued creative writing in San Francisco State University. And then from there, I wanted to get my master's in writing. I went to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. And then I dropped out at the very end because it just didn't feel fulfilling anymore. And it didn't feel like it was the right path. And it's unfortunately too that the program was really inundated with traditional, conventional white writers. and I just felt like it was a wasted opportunity, especially at the Jack Kerouac School. So then after that, I went to get my MFA at California College of the Arts to get an MFA in comics. And that was I always talk about this in like every interview, but it was the most challenging and the most rewarding experience for me academically, and it led to a lot of opportunities. But that's like the mainstream path. But all along that way, I was also studying and learning from artists underground, doing things like 24-hour comics day every year for the last like 10 years. Do you know what underground? Do you know what 24-hour comics day is?
Nope. Please tell me.
Okay, so every year, usually in the fall, September or October, comic shops, art studios, schools, sometimes individuals will host a 24-hour comics day in which people are invited to spend 24 hours together overnight. And you spend every hour working on a single comic to finish a 24-page comic within a day.
So one project for all of the artists?
Each artist gets to make their own thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so 24-hour comics day, you just make up a story and you go through the whole process, whatever your process is to make comics. And by the end of that 24-hour period, you should have a full comic done, including colored if you want to do a colored comic. And so it's a challenge for a lot of people. But in doing that, you get to experience comics the way that they were originally shared and the way that the information was disseminated. So always grassroots, always do it yourself. And I think that comics, that underground, like do it yourself comics experience has educated me the most. Out of like, it educated me more than like a lot of aspects of school, you know?
Yeah.
Because you're learning from working artists who make as a way of life, and not just a way to make a living, but a way of life, like processing through comics and experiencing life and documenting it through comics.
Why do you choose comics as your art?
I love comics because anyone can do them. Like you don't need, like going back to that point of it being underground, grassroots, anyone can make a comic with a pencil and a napkin, scrap of paper.
I used to do this. I post some on Instagram. I mean, not quality as like yours, but something like this.
I'm gonna check that out. I love that.
Please don't.
I love that. No, it makes me happy. I think, I remember being in high school and just drawing all the time. And so anyone can do it. You don't need to go to school to learn how to do it. And it's also not lofty information that you have to study for a while before you tackle it, you know?
Yeah.
Some people feel that way about like aspects of writing, like some high forms of poetry seem inaccessible to people. Whereas comics, you can kind of look at it and intuitively know how to read it. And then you could probably figure out how to make them just by looking at them too.
Yeah, I like what you said there because, as Filipinos back in the early 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of Filipinos learned reading through comics because they used to go to the market and there's like a stand that sells comics and then they'll give to people will pay, I don't know, a cent or whatever. Said they'll learn reading through that. That's actually my dad, when he was young, that's how he learned how to read, is reading comics.
Yeah, my mom too. My mom also told me that. Like her main ways of learning English was watching cowboy movies because everything's so like exaggerated and you can kind of figure things out. And then also comics because there's pictures and it's not just like a children's book either. There's a lot more meaning that you can extract from comics, from a very simple comic strip.
Exactly.
And still in the Philippines, right? There's like comics on boxes at the grocery store and chip bags, and you can find them anywhere.
Yeah. When I was in elementary, actually, I used to collect comics. I used to go to this after school. We'll go to the market, and then
Remember Street Fighter,
Oh yeah.
the video game? They made like a Filipino story of that, and man, I collect that every week. That's my
That's so
comic books.
cool.
Like, I didn't have Superman. We're poor. That's that, but at least that I could afford. And
Hmm.
I loved it. I saved. I don't know what happened to them. My grandma probably threw it
Oh,
away. But
oh.
I know it sucked. Speaking of comics, do you read Filipino?
I wish I did. No, I have Filipino comics, but I just read them and study them. I don't
Okay.
really understand what I'm reading.
Which one's your favorite?
I have Tabi Po. It's probably one of my favorites.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's new ones. How about the older ones like Darna, Zuma,
Darna, yeah,
and
I have Darna, and I have I even have the Filipino comics collection that was I think put out by either the University of the Philippines or the Ayala Center or something like that. Like a really big compendium of historic comics and like fun old school comics from like the 30s and 40s
this is the best. I love those.
Philippines. Yeah.
What's your opinion about Darna?
I love Darna. Do you have an opinion about
I
Darna?
love Darna.
Yeah, I think I don't really hear anyone say anything different from
Yeah,
that.
one thing I like about Darna is like, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is Filipinos we're not really that sexist. We're more like, oh, this is the job for the women, this is the job for the man, but we don't look at it like, oh, you're lower than me, I'm higher than you kind of situation. And I love that our main superhero is Darna, who is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, absolutely. A lot of the figures that we look up to in the Philippines, right, are women figures, and that's interesting too because I think we do still, in some ways, deal with like patriarchal behaviors within families and communities, but for the most part, there's a general public love for Darna and other women characters. And whereas in the US, women characters have a harder time becoming popular or seen as real heroes. They're kind of seen as like a counterpart to a male, or they're seen as secondary, tertiary characters. Even like Black Widow, who's finally getting a movie, right? Like people don't hold her to the same esteem as Iron Man, right?
No.
And there's very few characters that can compare besides Wonder Woman, that can compare or hold up to Batman and Superman and all these really great heroes who are men. But yeah, culturally, I would say in the Philippines, and that carries out into the diaspora in North America, that we embrace the strength of womanhood.
I completely agree. And I don't. I find that most household is more run by the women.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like we have the saying, which is, I don't know what you think about, like the under the saya.
What is that?
It's like the man that is scared of the woman because the
Oh,
woman's
oh,
gonna beat them up.
yeah, absolutely.
Things like that. With my family and a lot of family that I know, they're head by women, like
Hmm.
strong, powerful women. They don't really speak, but when they move, you move too.
Absolutely. I think that really comes from, after the Spanish, a lot of that change, at least temporarily. And, but behind the scenes, I think in our private experiences with our family, the women are in charge. The women are the ones that keep the families together and going. They keep traditions going, the arts going.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's a reverence that rings true, when we see that in art, like with Darna. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, absolutely, the hero is a woman. Why would it be anything else?
yeah. There's no
Um,
doubt.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they know more things anyway.
and
What are men gonna do? We're just gonna do stupid shit and cause war and whatnot.
yeah, and it's so fascinating too, because in like let's say in the USA, traditionally the men take care of finances and money, right? Or that's supposedly the gender role,
Mhm.
and they hold a lot of power in America, within American families because of that. And in the Philippines, it's different, where women traditionally, before the Spanish especially, were in charge of finances, economy,
Yes.
and trade and diplomacy. So I think that still carries on into our families now.
Yeah, like I said, I find like our Filipino culture is very, I find equal at least. Like you know how they're saying that men are they're the they're the one that we depend on, the family depends on, and the women are the light of the family.
Mm-hmm.
I always love that saying because it's like, yeah, they both different do different things, but they're both equally important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Talking about comics, before we move on to other things, I want to say I love that art that you did of two women lying down on their side, I think in a spoon position, and one's holding the other one's mouth,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the other one's kissing. I love that picture. I think it's called Scar.
Yeah, yeah.
I love
Thank
that.
you.
Oh, because I love the shape of them. It reminds me of Sierra Madre, the
Mm-hmm.
mountains in the Philippines. I'm like, yeah, I love that one.
Oh,
Eh,
thank you. That was my inspiration, was to have it resemble the curvature and shape of a mountain. Mhm.
oh yeah, okay, yeah, I saw that. Like, yo, this is cool, man. I like
Oh,
this one.
cool.
Yeah, and another one that I like is which is on a different size, the Michael K. Williams
Mm-hmm.
photograph. I love that too.
Oh, Michael K. Williams.
Yeah, rest in peace, obviously. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
important. I loved him because The Wire.
Oh, yeah. Hands
Yeah,
down, one of my favorite shows.
he's the best. And I'm gonna tell you something personal, but before I go to bed with my kids, I always say, "Come at the king," and then they will
Yo,
say, "You best not miss."
that's not miss.
Yeah,
That's so cute. I love that.
yeah. And I explain to them like, when you're ready to go against the king, the best, you better be ready, be prepared. I
I
just
love
love
that.
that. That's why I love, like when I saw that picture, I'm like, yo, this is my
Mm.
girl right here. I love it.
Oh, thank you. You know what's funny? So many Filipinos messaged me about that piece, and it's funny because like I know a lot of people who didn't know Michael K. Williams, but a lot of Filipinos loved him for so many reasons. Besides, I think a lot of them know him because of The Wire,
Hmm.
and then they learn about who he was, and he's just someone who worked really, really freaking hard on his acting and on his life. And so I think we resonate with stories like that,
Yeah.
people like that who not just like make it against all odds, but just people who believe in hard work. I think
Hmm.
that's who we are, that we value that and we appreciate people who remain humble even after doing that. So yeah,
Completely
his
agree.
passing, it meant a lot to lose someone like that.
So, who were your influences?
Well, when I was younger, I of course loved Marvel. I loved Calvin and Hobbes in the Sunday
Oh, I love this one
papers.
too.
Yeah, Boondocks a little later. Um, and some indie comics that I really loved was by Jonan Vasquez, who made Invader Zim. But before Invader Zim, it was Johnny the Homicidal Maniac and Squee, which were weird horror, fantasy, violent kind of black and white comics. But his art style and his humor blew me away and it really influenced me. So I wanted to ink like him, and I practiced all the time. Um, and then later down the line, it was people like Linda Berry,
Hmm.
Matt Groening, um, and like nowadays, it's like Emil Ferris and Tilly Walden. There's so many amazing people, but yeah, my start was, oh yeah, the Far Side Gallery,
Oh,
Gary
yeah. I
Larson, all those funny comics.
Speaking of like just delivering the punch,
Yeah.
like
Oh man.
one square and that's it.
Yeah, that's like such an amazing challenge too for anyone who wants to do comics, is like try to make a funny comic or a witty thing within one panel. um it's a fun exercise, and to see how many, like hundreds, he's done. Yeah, he's a huge inspiration. I used to just read his books on my couch in middle school for hours and just laughing at things. And it was also my first comic book that I got. My first comic collection was Farside Gallery. Um, and I was like 6 years old, and I got it from a Goodwill. My mom got it for me for like $2.
Hmm.
And I was so thrilled. It was a huge book. And I just read them over and over.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. So was it your mom that gave you the love for comics?
It was both my parents, mostly my mom, who would say things like, she kind of respected comics, and would talk about them and was really interested in movies inspired by comics. So she loved Batman, and she got me really into that when I was young. So much so that she got me a 14 karat gold. Like, it was the only piece of jewelry I had. It was like a 14 karat gold Batman symbol from the 1986, 89 movie.
Yeah, 89.
89, and then it had my name engraved in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wore it all the time. And one time I wore it to a kid's birthday party where they had a slip and slide.
Mm.
You know what those are?
Yeah.
Some people don't. Yeah, okay.
We still have
And
those.
I went on a slip and slide, and then I got up afterwards, and I was like bleeding, and I didn't realize what was going on, and everyone around me was like screeching. And I looked down, and my Batman necklace had like embedded in my chest just a little bit. And it looked like someone had ninja starred me in the chest.
Or somebody threw at a Batman.
That's what it looks like. The Batarang.
The Batarang, yeah.
Yeah, and so I have like a Batman tattoo now, like kind of framing that scar that's in my chest.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, Batman's like in my heart.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, thanks, Mom. But my dad was the one who used to cut out Sunday funnies, and he would leave them for me, like on the table for me to see.
That's nice. Why do they have to cut it out? I don't.
Oh no, he just would. Oh, because I remember why. Because I would take them, and I had a special wall where I kind of saved things that made me laugh, and he would hope that I liked them enough to put one up.
That's
so
awesome.
he always cut it out and left it for me. He was really sweet.
That's sweet. I used to do that too. I'll choose like a nice, funny one, and I'll save it. They don't last, obviously, because it's paper.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Can we talk about your graphic memoir, Crushed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love that one.
Thank
Can you give us a little bit of the background?
Yeah. Crushed is my memoir, and I published the first book. There's two books in 2018. And it is a book that I had been working on for about 3 or 4 years before I published it, like from conception to finishing it. And it was my senior thesis project for my MFA program, but the version that I graduated with is not the version that people saw later. I scrapped that whole first version and redid the book in 2018. And the second half, I'm waiting to publish that one. But essentially, Crushed is a biomythography, and I borrow that word from Audre Lorde. But it's part memoir. It also has some history about adoption in it and the effects of adoption in the Philippines, and then it also has some mythology in it. So I use elements of Filipino mythology to explore aspects of like inner experience and mental health. And then I also just naturally include elements of mythology and spirituality because it naturally came out when people were talking story, with me in the Philippines. It's like a part of my family's language, to include like a duende or a diwata as a part of a story, like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And so the
Man,
book,
I'm scared of those guys, man. Growing up,
right?
Oh
It's
my
real.
God.
It seems so real, and the way my family in the Philippines right now still talks about those things is like they're real. So
Maybe they are real. No one
they
knows.
are.
I still do the tabi-tabi po. I promise you. I am almost 40 and I still do it.
Same. I don't take risks. I don't play with my life.
I don't want my boss being like 100 pounds, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Always.
So, sorry, I cut you off with your crush. I just want to say
Oh,
something.
no. I really relate because we live near a cemetery too. So every time we pass by it, we do different things to make sure, no spirits follow us home. And like after funerals, we still like pug somewhere else and then go home.
Yeah. Wash your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So the main character of Crush, obviously is half you and half fictionalized, right?
It's mostly me. Some elements of like experience are borrowed also from other women that I know who experience some some kind of mental health issue that stems from adoption.
What do you mean by that?
For some people, adoptees experience trauma from being separated from their families at an early age. So, biological traumas that are hard to address growing up when you don't understand that or no one has the language for it. And only now in the last maybe 10 years have people really been publishing articles about it. And when adoptees have been expressing this experience for a long time, it's a feeling of something being absent or missing from your life and you can't explain it. And for a lot of people, that causes incredible distress as a young person. I think given certain circumstances, like nurturing circumstances, those inner experiences can develop into depression, anxiety, other like personality disruptions. And so it's a very common phenomenon that happens with adoptees. And I wanted to make sure that if any other Filipino adoptees read this book, that they felt seen, even in the ugliness of that experience, the shame of that experience, you know. And I wanted to show that for adoptees, there's ways of being with that experience and that pain without losing your freaking mind, you know. There's ways of being with it and nurturing it. And the only ways that I learned are from my Filipino family in the like I say Filipino family because I'm adopted, right? So here in America, I call my family my Filipino American family. And then the Philippines, it's my family in the Philippines. But their ways of thinking have been way more healing than American and Western ideas of mental health so far. At least culturally speaking, for example, when I was younger, I used to feel like there was a part of me that would leave my body when I got either scared or I got nervous. Something would feel not good, and I would suddenly feel like I wasn't really there. I couldn't really sense things as vividly as I normally would, or flavors would be less intense, and I'd kind of zone out. And then I learned later, right, that is actually dissociation. That's when your body is protecting you from a very uncomfortable or scary situation, and it comes from trauma. When I go to the Philippines and I talk about this, it's not just that it's trauma. It's that your spirit leaves to protect your body because it's not safe in there in that moment. And when it is safe and your body's just starting to, you know, your spirit's starting to leave, you can actually pull it back and get it to stay. And so to know that you have that kind of power, I mean, that's empowering, right? Versus, oh, this thing just happens to me and I don't know how to get it to stop.
Yeah,
I have to learn how to meditate. Yeah. Yeah, or like 10 years from now, maybe the symptoms will go away because I do enough therapy. But in the Philippines, they're like, you can start pulling yourself in again and making it safe to be in your body. And there's certain things that you can do, you know, to make sure that you do that daily. It's a whole different experience, a connection.
I love that. I love that. I just want to touch back about saying about shame. So you know, in Filipino culture, being adopted is a taboo or frowned upon. Were there other people in your family's inner circle that made you feel lesser because you're ampon?
Yeah, you know, like as a kid, you don't really understand. You just understand when someone's being mean to you, right? You don't really get the reasons. I do remember like aunts and uncles every now and then making sure that I knew I wasn't blood. Because you know, there's that pride, right?
I have a cousin that is adopted, and as a family we don't do that, but the other side they do it, and I always hated it.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and fortunately, there are some Filipino families, right, who know how to handle that. They're like, oh no, we do this all the time in the Philippines. Someone will like join your family and suddenly you're your cousin or your brother. And it's some families normalize that. And then other families are like, oh, you're not our blood. Like we have very pure like Ramos blood and you're not one of our clan. Uh, and that gets so old, right? Like, and that comes from old stuff. But, you know, adoption in certain ways has always happened in the Philippines. We've always had like non-nuclear family in our families. And we've had blended families. But for me, I had like uncles and aunts who did little things to let me know that I wasn't really part of the family. And that would be like offhand comments, or like during Christmas, everyone gets like a really nice gift and then I get like a $5 bill, right?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I'm not like I'm begging for money. I don't need the money, but I would notice like, oh, I was an afterthought. I wasn't really included in this planning. And then, you know, it became more evident as I got older when I could really listen to people that there were some old school thoughts about me. Like, I once heard my uncle say like, oh, don't give her any money because she's just going to send that money to the Philippines where her like greedy, poor family is just waiting for their, you know, their remittance. And I was like, wow. And I could never even fathom that this family member would say such a mean thing about a kid and to say that about a kid who's trying to help. Because I used to send money to my family starting when I was 14. I started sending money to my family. And then have never stopped. And that's always been really important to me. But some family members, you know, including people who are classist in our Filipino families, you know, who are like, oh, I'm like handing money to poor people when they really should just be helping themselves.
Ugh.
There's a lot of that attitude too.
I know. I hated that too.
You hear it, yeah.
I hate it. Like, yo, we're good.
Yeah.
Have you seen them?
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I always hated that. But I love that you still help them out and send money to them. Are you close to them? Your biological? Yeah.
Yeah, I love them very much. My adoptive parents here did a good job of making sure that I embraced being adopted, even when it was hard for me. Like I never rejected the idea of being adopted, but I remember being aware that people thought I should be ashamed. And so trying to navigate that was really weird as someone who was also anxious and scared of being judged and like shy. I used to have shame even if I didn't feel ashamed. So I was like holding other people's shame for me. Yeah, what were we saying?
I don't know. But
Yeah.
before, I never cared about if people is adopted. Like for me, they're like, oh, that's their family, whatever. But I always remember this joke from a comedian called, his name's Steve Simone. So anyway, there was a joke that his brother was saying that his younger brother is adopted. And the younger brother that's being bullied that's saying being adopted, he once said that, well, at least my mom and dad loves me more because they chose me.
Yeah. Yeah.
They really chose me. You just came out.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
I love that one. So did you have survival's guilt knowing that you have a good life in the US and your biological family are struggling back home?
Yeah, I think I deal with that all the time. It's really hard. And like even when I come from a middle class family, like lower middle class. Both my parents were accountants, right, in the Philippines. And so when they came here, they were able to still do accounting. Like my mom came in the late 50s and she had to work as a maid and did all this stuff, but eventually got back to doing accounting like 10, 15 years later. And there was a hustle there, but we had a comfortable living growing up. And then when I moved out on my own as an artist, I was like, oh, so this is what it feels like to have to really work hard to like make it. So for like, 15 years I was away from home trying to like be independent American girl. And in doing that, I was still sending money home. So living in the Bay Area where rent is like $2,000 for a 1 bedroom, and you have to pay all your bills and then you also send money home. It was hard. And then I was like, even though I feel like I'm struggling, I have a sister who's in Kuwait because she's working as a maid to send money home to our family, and she sends almost 100% of that money back to them.
Heroes.
Yeah, so I'm like, I can do this. I'm like, whatever small amount I can make for my art, that small amount does a lot for my family. Like, that can buy them groceries for a whole week. So yeah, I have guilt, and I understand the privilege of being here and the responsibility.
That's awesome. Did you put extra pressure on yourself to make sure your adopted parents are proud?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think I had that I very much, I'm going to go in a few minutes, but
Yeah.
yeah, I had that, I was a really rebellious kid, but at the same time, even though I was rebellious, I still had this deep, powerful Filipina need to please my parents. I'm not going to be a nurse, you guys, and I'm never probably going to make a lot of money given my interests and what I'm going to try to do, but I'm going to make you proud in one way or another, And so I still do things like if I get into a publication like the New Yorker, I send it to my parents, and I'm like, look at what I did.
Look at me, Ma, top of the world.
Yeah, and then they're always my parents never put me down, but they also never pump me up.
Yeah,
they're very
so
Filipino.
Yeah, good job.
They just keep it going. So I'm just like, I'm gonna try even harder.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Do you have a few more minutes or?
Well, I could do 5 more minutes.
So, what's next for Trinidad? What's the next project?
Thank you for asking. I have I write songs too. I do music. So I have a song coming out, and it'll be on Apple and Spotify and all that stuff, and Bandcamp, and that's under Blue Ghosts, my band, with Meredith Hobbs Coons. And then in February, I have another book coming out called Arrive in My Hands with Black Jose Press, and that's a queer lesbian erotica collection. And it's specifically for Filipinas, so I hope they read it. I hope it weirds some of them out, knock some of the Catholic shame out of them. And
my God, that's forever there. That's never gonna leave. I promise you.
I know. I'm like, well, here's this offering. Here's a little thing for you. And then I have Trist, a Aswang story that is set in part of the Philippines, partly in America. And it's about 2 women who fall in love when they are in the Philippines and then have to separate and discover that they've both been infected by an aswang.
I love it.
Yes. And then in 2024 is my big graphic novel, which is Obscene Venom. And that's published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. And that will be the big one, 300 pages of fantasy set in pre-colonial Philippines.
Oh, that's awesome. What kind of research did you do for this project?
Oh yeah, I did a lot of research to kind of recreate a world that resembles prehistory Philippines, 1500s Central Philippines. I've been collecting information for many, many years and just reading for a long time. But what I did was I made a fantasy story so that, and my concern was in comics, we do cosplay, right? And so I wanted to be able to do something where people could dress up, but they're not stealing from the Philippines or you know what I mean? Or I don't know, mimicking us or something. So I prefer to take elements from our cultures and redesign what that might look like for a fantasy world.
That's awesome.
So it's technically an alternate history.
I like that. By the way, if somebody's going to do a cosplay on Manananggal, hey, go ahead. That's going to be impossible.
That's very messy.
By the way, for the ones that doesn't know that what Manananggal is, you say what Manananggal is.
Manananggal is a segmenter in the Philippines, and some people consider it an aswang, some people consider it an unga unga, and it essentially is like a vampiric woman or witch who can segment at the waist or upper torso. She flies around looking for usually pregnant women, women who are alone on the street, and also lone men in the forest. There's all types of people she goes for.
As long as they have blood, she'll eat
As long
it.
as they got blood.
And if it does not scare you enough at night to go to
Right.
bed, I promise you, nothing will. I love it. I love your art. I'm really grateful that you came on. I'd love to talk to you more, but I know you had to go. But before you leave, I just want to ask you one more question, if that's okay. What is the thing that you're proudest of so far, and why?
What am I proudest of so far?
Yeah, you did a lot. New Yorker, NPR, I mean, all over the place. By the way, the first ever guest that has a Wikipedia of herself.
Thank you. You know, really, the thing I'm proudest of right now is the fact that I got to be a part of a show called Women in Comics in Italy. So originally, the show started in New York at the Society of Illustrators, and it's a collection of works by women cartoonists and non-binary cartoonists who span many, many years, several decades, from the 60s up until now. So I was in the show with some of my heroes like Linda Barry. And then the show got picked up for Italy. It was moved over to Rome and then Naples for like a government sponsored, like first ever Women in Comics exhibit. And I think I'm proudest of that because I wrote a comic that was about sexual assault. And the book was Drawing Power, and it's a collection of comic stories based on cartoonists' real experiences being harassed or having experienced sexual violence. And my story was one of the more visceral ones in the book. And it was really scary to publish because, you know, a lot of people don't believe victims, and there's a lot of shaming too around that. But I thought, you know, there's so much not talking about this. There's a lot of silence around this, especially with Filipino families. There's a lot of shaming and silencing. Yeah. And it's pervasive in our families too. Like, I think every Filipina I know knows someone who has been harmed within their own families or who have experienced it, you know, by a close friend. And so it's such a big, you know, epidemic to me that it felt irresponsible to not tell the story. And then when I told it, it blew up and it went everywhere. And I was like, oh no. And I felt like retreating because it was so scary. But then I started getting a lot of feedback, a lot of letters of people saying, thank you for talking about this when I can't talk about it to anyone in my family. And people who were buying the book to give it to people in their families that they knew had experienced something. So I'm proudest of that just because of the effect it's had and how much it took to make it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Again, Trinidad, thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And by the way, you're always welcome to come back because I want to talk to you more about art and all this stuff.
Thank you. You're so fun to talk to, and you're so gracious and thoughtful. So I will be back. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Again, Trinidad, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, listeners, for listening. This is Endel Yosa for An Immigrant's Life. I'll see you guys later.